There are so many little examples of this, right? Like Band-Aids being made so that they match mostly white skin, and that's called flesh-colored, and that's seen as normal. To everything that we see not being done through the lens of race. Whiteness is just seen as the norm, and it's not seen as something exceptional or that it even shapes us. So every day there's all this unconscious conditioning that we get as white people. And one of the crucial pieces for us is, how do we see that? So we know that whiteness is a construct. It's not something that's real, but it's a construct that we've all bought into. So it's sort of like if we're looking through a window, we're seeing everything through that window.
All right, let me stop this here. You ever notice that gauze is white because of whiteness? Issue of Band-Aids. Yes, it was mostly made for white people. Why? Because white people are the vast majority of America. Even now, they are still the vast majority. Yeah, you make a Band-Aid for, like, you know, flesh tones for white people. I don't think that's systematic racism. I think that's marketing. You're going, you know, if you're going to make a product, you're going to make it for your largest consumer. That's just how marketing works. That's not racism.
And then on top of that, you got to think, like, what's the chances that the person who created the Band-Aid actually sat down and said, it has to be a specific color. It has to be made to blend in with white people's skin. Like, how much time do you think was actually devoted to that?
A lot, actually. I do think that a lot of time was devoted to the actual color, but here's the kicker, is that people have different levels of melatonin, even among white people. I mean, my skin is a little bit on the darker side compared to other white people, especially being here in PA. I was so amazed by how pale people look here. I'm used to being in Arizona where I see darker white people, and here in Pennsylvania I see whiter light people. So that Band-Aid being flesh tone, I think was like they really spent some time trying to figure out what color to make that specifically, but it would only help a small subset of people to make it flesh tone, because not everyone has that tone of flesh, even amongst white people. They probably chose as neutral of a color as possible for their largest consumer, which would have been white people. To make a product specifically for the minority of your customer is going to detract away from the consumer that you're trying to target. That's how marketing works. That's how capitalism works. And eventually, they came out with Band-Aids for people of darker skin colors.
Yeah, there's Band-Aids of every shade and color.
And so a big part of how we do that is that this can then result in a lot of different behaviors that can be conscious and unconsciously racist. So assuming that the experiences that we have are the same as the experiences of people of color. And one of the things that can happen is to minimize and justify and explain away racism. So you can look at recent examples about what's happening in Iowa and in the Dakotas around the pipeline and the fight that Indigenous people are taking against that, or Colin Kaepernick and his stance against the national anthem and unearthing some of the racism that's in there. And I think some of the big pieces that you can see is how are white people using this as a way to attack people of color for standing up for their rights and standing up for racial justice and showing up in that way again and again, and using that as a way to belittle and to try to demean and make people of color smaller. And refusing to use this as an opportunity for us to really examine what's true about this. Where is the racism here, and how can we do that in an ongoing way?
And I'm hearing Anita Sarkeesian speak right now. Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything's homophobic, and you have to point it all out. That's all I'm hearing right now. The national...
You constantly have to be on the hunt for what's wrong.
Well, yeah, and I've actually seen this firsthand from I do have friends that are social justice warriors, and we long agreed not to discuss politics because then we get into trouble. Although we have found a lot of common ground. But, it's fascinating to me the mind that this person has, because she will seek out what's wrong with something. Like, I often tell the story about the the superhero party on the SNL. It was like in the 70s, and it's rather funny because it's like you have Superman there, then the Flash shows up, then the Incredible Hulk shows up, and then you have just this mixture of DC and Marvel characters in a party together. But because the one black man that was on the cast for SNL at the time is playing Ant-Man, and all the characters are making fun of Ant-Man for his powers, and my friend was like, well, that's racist. I'm like, why is that racist? And she's like, well, because he's a black man. They're making fun of him. Like, no, they're making fun of the character he's portraying, not him specifically. They're not even addressing the fact that Ant-Man is a black guy. They're just addressing that his character, his powers are a little bit on the weak side.
It's like with Aquaman. Aquaman is the butt of so many superhero jokes. Oh, he can talk to fish and he can breathe underwater. Good for him. And guess what? He's white. People make fun of Aquaman all the time, and it's not like, well, that's racist. No, it's just a comic book character. If suddenly Aquaman became black, it wouldn't just become racist. It's like, no, these are long-standing jokes.
Well, another example is I showed her once an episode of Chuck, and it was a scene where Adam Baldwin was fighting his former sensei. And when she saw this, she didn't have any understanding of what the show Chuck was. So she's like, oh my god, it's Jane Cobb fighting Mercenary from the Serenity movie. And I'm like, no, it's a different actor. She's like, oh my god, I was so racist when I said that. And I'm like, hold up for a moment. If you mistook Adam Baldwin for another white guy, would you have considered yourself racist? She's like, no. So why do you consider yourself racist for mistaking the identity of one black man for another? And she kind of stepped back and thought about that for a moment, and she didn't really respond to that. But it's like, we mistake the identity of people all the time, but when it happens to a black person, it's automatically racist. But when it happens to white people, it's perfectly okay. And yes, I've mistaken the identity of black people before. But that doesn't make me a racist for doing it. I've done it with white people. I've done it with Asian people. But it doesn't make me a racist. It's just that your mind can play tricks on yourself. That if there's something that you don't understand, it immediately can create false memories. So she sees a black actor and doesn't necessarily really see his face very well, or she does, and then immediately thinks of, Serenity and the operative. And that somehow in her mind she thinks that they look alike. Only when she goes back and later realize they don't. But it doesn't mean that she was racist, it just meant her mind played a trick on her.
Her mind made a false connection.
Exactly.
I think another piece of this is that a lot of times white people identify when racism is named, that's racist. And that's sort of one of the ways that we try to silence any sort of acknowledgement that white people have power or that racism exists. And so I think for me, one of the things that's been really crucial is to note that even though I didn't personally enslave or colonize people, I still benefit from that system. And so recognizing that by pointing out racism, by naming the way that it shows up, that doesn't make me as an individual person responsible for it, but I do have a responsibility to be taking down this whole system. And it doesn't make someone racist for naming the racist system.
Okay, so you benefit from the racism that existed in our country. I benefit from it. Josh benefits from it. I think her name is Sandra Kim. She benefits from it. Everyone living today benefits from the racism exhibit in the world prior to the modern age. Our country was built on the backs of slaves. Yes, it was also built on the backs of whites, poor whites, rich whites, Asians, everyone. But not even just that, the entire world. Yes, it's unfortunate that it happened. It's unfortunate that, in the Americas, we forced Native Americans off their land. It is very unfortunate that happened, and certainly we should do stuff to try to live in coexistence with them, to make peace with that. To give back their dignity and give them rights within our society, of the society that took over their society. But in no way am I directly responsible for what my ancestors did. This is just so asinine. Honestly, you're just constantly saying that. Well, and she even acknowledges, I didn't actually do it, but it's my responsibility to take down this system. It's the responsibility of every person to contribute to their society. And I'm not even saying, contribute to the patriarchy or contribute to the establishment. It is the responsibility of every person alive to make the world somewhat better than when they entered into it. Because that's how the human race propagates. If we leave it just a little bit better, then we've accomplished something in our lives. Even if that's just raising children, which is a very noble thing to do. But you can't make it seem like only feminists do this, or only people who realize their racism does this, and that they have a responsibility to take the system down. In place of what? Feminism?
It's like they keep saying systemic racism, but yet they haven't even once pointed to one bit of evidence of actual systemic racism. It's like, just because you use a word doesn't make it valid. It doesn't make it true. Give us what is actually broken so that it can be fixed. Don't just say, systemic racism, fix it.
Exactly. I mean, you and me, we've talked about a lot of different things. We brought up a lot of points about how systemic racism doesn't exist, and how whiteness doesn't exist, and how toxic whiteness doesn't exist. We've brought up a lot of examples. But this is a group of people that whenever you talk to them online, and they're like, oh, well, sexism exists, and because women have to walk around in fear at night, and then you say, well, men have to walk around at night in fear. No, they don't, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, show me evidence of your point. Like, I was talking to a woman not too long ago, and she was saying, well, men only get raped a minority of the time. And false rape only happens a minority of the time. And I'm like, okay, show me your evidence of that. Oh, well, you'll have to Google it to find out. Meaning that they heard it from another source, and they didn't bother looking it up for themselves. These are the same kinds of people. They don't need to show their work. You just have to accept what they say. And if you don't, you're part of the problem. At least when someone says, hey, show your work, I'll go and look for it. I'll go and find, evidence of what I'm talking about. And I know what that feminist was talking about. I actually knew better than she did what evidence she was talking about. She was talking about the CDC report. And I know the flaws of that report as well. I didn't get a chance to talk to her about that, but I was kind of hoping the conversation would go into that.
It's like when people say that men don't have to be afraid walking alone at night. Well, something like over 80% of violent crimes are committed towards men. So yeah, that's a far greater reason for men to be wary about being outside in the dark alone, because they're at a significantly higher rate of something bad happening to them.
And do you know how feminists respond to that?
It's done by other men. Other men are the perpetrators.
So that somehow erases the fact that men are more at risk walking alone at night than women. because it's other men who are doing it. That's not even part of the argument.
It's like I was talking to someone, and I brought up the fact that 40% of rape happens to men, and that's not even including prison rape that happens to men, which would make the number far larger. And she actually said prison rape doesn't count. It's like, oh, so the place that rape happens somehow negates the fact that it's rape. No. Well, then the fact that they're men negates the fact that it's rape. No. Well, then why does it not count?
Given that the term rape culture originated from the conditions in which men experience in prison.
Yeah, rape culture was actually a prison term.
And that is an actual rape culture. And we know about it, and nothing's being done about it. Because the people we elect are choosing to ignore it.
Maybe I'll pause there so we can keep moving.
Yeah, the whole whoever smelt it dealt it thing, that is not useful, I just gotta say. But it's a way of deflecting, right? So
right. And maybe just one more brief point before we move on is that I think in terms of as we're becoming more racially conscious, I think some of the ways that we do that is by looking at the stories that we've been told, the stories as white people that we have in our heads about different groups of people of color, about the ways that that shows up. I know in the chat there's a lot of attacks happening right now on different communities of color and on Jews. And I think it's just an interesting moment to say, oh, what are the stereotypes that are there? What are the stories that I've been taught? And what's the truth here? And I think one of the things that's so crucial is to really be able to grieve the ways in which we've lost our ability to both see people individually and to see the harm of the stories that we've been told and the racist myths that we've been told, and sort of the ways in which we've been unintentionally brainwashed into seeing groups of people of color or seeing policies as being justified that marginalize and attack communities of color in an ongoing way. So that disconnection from the experience of people of color and of systemic racism and the ways in which as white people we really learn that every day, like the air that we breathe.
Mm-hmm. And that's really difficult to realize that the air that you breathe that has actually been toxic, has actually been harmful to yourself and other people. Right? Mm-hmm. And there is, I think, that importance of grieving, which we don't get taught, and there's not much space in this country and in our world really to grieve. Take that time, and this is, what I'm gonna, what we teach in Compassionate Actives is actually how to help people do that, because it's there, right? And that often drives a lot.
Right.
If we don't take care of it, it's gonna come out still.
Mm-hmm.
They stop us from taking the actions that we want to take to end race, to end systemic.
Citation, please. That first point right there. Your unconscious conditioning teaches you that racism is in the past and that people of color deserves what happened to them. Bull fucking shit. Only people who think that, even on an unconscious level, are already racists.
They're assholes.
And they have no problem letting you know how racist they are.
Yeah. They tend to be very open about it.
I mean, I need a citation where you get that from. This generally manifests as victim blaming, refusal to recognize the pain of POC, and denying implicit bias. Okay, I don't refuse to recognize the pain of people of color, but I don't exactly give in like, well, my people were enslaved, so I need special treatment. No, you don't. I recognize the pain that your ancestors may have gone through, but you don't go through that pain yourself. I recognize the pain that the black community currently goes through now with black-on-black violence that is ignored by Black Lives Matter, by the media, and by the government. I recognize that. And I wish more was done about it, specifically by the community itself.
Yeah, but with people like this, far too often you hear things like black-on-black crime doesn't exist. Because I see that on Twitter at least 3 or 4 times a day.
Yeah, I see that too. That people are just in denial that black-on-black crime happens. They want us to believe that cops are the number one killer of black people.
But the fact is, like, over 75% of black murder is committed by other black people in their own communities.
So you know what? I recognize the pain of people of color, just not the way you think I should.
Instead of tackling that issue, they're like, no, let's just blame it on somebody else.
Specifically, white people. Everything that's happening bad for blacks in America is because of white people. Hey, if you never got slaves, you wouldn't have this problem. And if I could invent a time machine and go to our forefathers and it's like, yeah, you really need to, like, not buy slaves. Trust me, it's not going to work out in the long run. And then guess what? There have been no slaves in America, and most, if not all, of the African Americans living today would be in Africa. And then everyone could be happy, right? No one would be happy with that.
The fact that you even said that if you had a time machine, you would go back in time and stop all this, somehow somebody will look at that as that's a white supremacist statement because you don't want blacks in America. I guarantee it.
Yeah, that's probably what would happen. So, me wanting slavery to have existed because of all of the benefits that, you know, we have today. I mean, the fact that blood transfusion was invented by a black man. I believe he was the one who discovered plasma and blood and was able to extract it from the blood. I believe also a black person was the first to do open heart surgery. I don't know about that one. I might have to double check on that. But there's been a lot of things that's happened because we've had black people in America. And unfortunately, that came on the backs of slavery. Unfortunate, but we've moved past that. It's 2016. Get over it.
Current year.
Current year. You use that against us. You know, yes, I hate the fact that slavery happened, but you know what? We moved past it. We've grown as a society. There's been a lot of growing pains, but we've done it. We're now at a plateau where we should be celebrating that we've stripped all of this away, and you just can't let it go. You have to hold on to it because you don't want to be responsible for yourself. There's more money being made in being a victim than being a functioning member of society, of trying to make the world a better place, of trying to get ourselves out of this rut that we are in because of people like you.